Hello, welcome to another edition of the Family Renewal Podcast. I'm Israel Wayne, and I am excited because today I have a friend of mine who I consider to be homeschool royalty, and I'm going to give a long-winded introduction to Zan Tyler that will probably make her really uncomfortable and embarrassed, but it would be almost be easier for me to try to list things that Zan hasn't done in the homeschooling movement than to try to list everything she has. But she is the former founder and president of SCAES, which is a South Carolina homeschool state organization. She has done work for Christianity Today. Not Christianity Today, Christianity.com.
That's right. That's right.
The magazine is a different thing altogether, but Christianity.com as executive education editor. I used to do some for them back in the day when she was working there. And then she went from there over to Crosswalk and handled a lot of content for them, particularly on the education side, was the senior education editor at Crosswalk. Then she went to acquisitions editor at B&H Publishing, otherwise known as Broadman and Holman, which is connected with the Southern Baptist Convention. And at the time, they were doing a lot of publishing in the homeschool world. And so she was helping them to find great authors and get great books published. And they really did come out with some amazing books from people like Chris Klicka and Michael Ferris. And of course, Zan, her book, The 7 Tools for Cultivating Your Child's Potential, I think was originally published through.
That's right.
And I'm going to start making stuff up here. So correct me whenever I get it wrong, but I think it seems like Rick and Boyer maybe had a book that was published through them, and can't remember everybody, but there was quite a few authors that were published through them at the time. And then she served as the National Grassroots Director for parentalrights.org. This is not all necessarily in sequence, but and then for 12 years worked with Apologia, and you would know about her speaking as a conference speaker for them, and she was a director of language arts, Bible, history, and press for them for a long time, helping to create a lot of great content through our friends there at Apologia. We like much of what they do, and really has been featured in so many different publications and been published in Homeschool Court Report. She has been featured on the Today Show with Katie Couric, has won a ton of accolades, including the Robert Dreyfuss Courageous Christian Leadership Award in 2015, won the Chris Klicka Award from HSLDA. She has done consulting for HSLDA and Homeschool Foundation, has been a voice for Homeschool Foundation, I believe representing them in South Carolina. Won the South Carolina Homemaker of the Year Award that was presented by Phyllis Schlafly and Eagle Forum. And then won the Order of the Palmetto, which is the highest award that can be given to any South Carolina resident or citizen by the Governor David Beasley, and married a perfect husband named Joe Tyler.
Right.
Has had 3 perfect children, and
Totally.
And has a PhD from Harvard. And that's only, well, I made up that last one, but it has more accolades than what we'd spend the entire half hour here just talking about everything that Zan has done. But before you were all of that, and we're going to talk about what you're doing now with BJU. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
Okay, great.
But before all of that, at a point, you probably would have described yourself as a mom, right? That probably would have been the thing, and that's kind of in some ways the thing that's led to a whole bunch of the stuff that you've done professionally. It started out of you being a mom, right?
That's exactly right.
Who knows where that can lead? You got to watch this, people. You want to think this through, because you don't know what you're getting into when you start this path, this mom path.
That's right.
So, people don't know this, but Zan was actually influential in helping to legalize homeschooling in South Carolina. And that was not your goal and intent. You didn't set out with, hey, let's legalize homeschooling in South Carolina and help start a national movement of that. How did this whole homeschool journey start for you?
Well, it's interesting, Israel. I'm going to take you back to my junior year in college.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to say there were two things I would never do in life. One was teach, and the other was have kids.
Wow.
And so God has a sense of humor.
Yes.
And I'm so glad. I was planning to go to law school. Joe, as my husband, was my best friend. He was a serious believer. I was a serious believer. But I had never even considered what Christ might have for me in terms of a home and a family. And so in my junior year of college, Joe proposed, which ruined all of my life plans. He was my best friend. I didn't speak to him for 6 weeks. But somebody gave me Elizabeth Elliot's book, Let Me Be a Woman. And she had just written it. I took that book and my Bible up on a mountain. I was at Furman University. A friend of mine had a mountain house and spent several days just praying and seeking the Lord. And he just made it clear to me that he was calling me to be a wife and a mother. And so we got married right after I finished college. 9 months later, we had our first child. We had our second child right at our 3rd anniversary. And so the Lord just blessed. But I will tell you, the first time I ever heard the word homeschool, it was from a friend of mine who was getting ready to go on the mission field. And she was about maybe 8 or 10 years older than me and had taught in public school. She said, Zan, I am going to homeschool my son, Nat, when it comes time. And she handed me this book by Dr. Moore, Raymond Moore, and Homegrown Kids. And I had that same feeling I had when somebody handed me the book, Let Me Be a Mother. I thought, oh, this is going to change my life. And I am taking the offensive with God right now. This is 1984. I cannot homeschool. Nobody normal homeschools. We didn't know anybody in the world who homeschooled. And so I spent about 2 months telling the Lord all the reasons I could never homeschool. And then sure enough, I started reading that book. I was like, the Holy Spirit just gets hold of you. And I thought, this is the answer for my son's dilemma. Of course, if I'd been homeschooling for years when I had Ty, I would have just known he wasn't ready to read when he was 6, or 5. But it was a big deal when he was in kindergarten and he wasn't reading. Don't ask me why it was a big deal. So I had him tested. They said, hold him back. There was just a discrepancy between his verbal IQ was off the chart and his nonverbal IQ was not. So they said, just hold him back. Let the hemispheres of his brain start working together. And then I started reading this book by Dr. Moore. And I can remember I used to take an hour in the mornings when my husband Joe traveled a lot. But when he was home, I would get out and walk for an hour and listen to the Bible on tape. Just be thankful for your iPhones. And that was my time just to be with the Lord. And I just remember him was like my sheep hear my voice, him saying, Van, I want you to homeschool. And me saying, no, God, I'm sorry. I cannot do this. So I ran inside. This is probably way more information than you wanted to know.
No,
okay. Right. So I ran home, got the kids dressed, went to the public school, and showed them my testing. I want to hold my son back a year. No problem, Ms. Tyler. These are great. This is a reputable tester. No problem. So I thought, oh, I'm so relieved. What was I thinking? Until a month later, when all the kids in our neighborhood got their kindergarten packet, but me. And I called the principal and he said, I'm sorry, Miss Tyler, you can't homeschool. You can't put your 6-year-old in my 5-year kindergarten program. I put him in 1st grade. So that wouldn't work. Private schools were filled at this time. There was no other alternative but to homeschool. So I called my old high school principal, who is now the associate superintendent at my school district. And ours had been a new high school, and I'd won several awards for the high school, so he loved me. I stayed my senior year just to work with the administration, and we were really close. I used to babysit his kids, and I said, I just need a note to hold Ty back a year. I told him everything that had happened, and he said, well, Zan, I can't do that. And I said, well, I guess I'm going to have to homeschool then. And I knew the minute I said that, he would say, okay. And he said, well, the school district has gotten real lenient with that kind of thing. Well, after I hired an attorney, because the State Department of Education and my local school district, none of them would even tell me what the homeschool law was. This is 1984. There are no state organizations, no HSLDA, and no LexisNexis. I mean, no internet. There was no place to find any information. So we hired an attorney, and he just gave me my options. And he said, there has been one person that was allowed to homeschool in your district during its entire history, and she was a certified teacher. I had been an economics major, so that was no good. So we applied. I hired the attorney. We filled out an application that was about this thick. I mean, they needed fire escape plans, the number of books in my house, letters of recommendation, my 36-week syllabus. And this was for K-5.
Wow.
So it was ridiculous. And I tell that story because I want people to appreciate their freedom. And I want them to understand how fragile freedom can be. I also tell this story for coronavirus moms who end up in a place, in a destination they swore they would never go to, which is homeschooling.
That's right.
And so it's really my story. So the school board turned us down. Even though I had followed the law meticulously, I have to call my attorney again and ask him what to do. And he said, well, you've got to appeal to the State Board of Education. However, they're going to turn you down. They're going to rubber stamp what the school district did, and you'll end up in family court. And I'm saying, Lord, this is why I told you I was not going to homeschool. And so right about a week before my hearing, I had this sort of epiphany, and I remembered that the state superintendent of education was a friend of my mother's. Now, Joe and I were extremely close to both sets of parents. One lived a half a mile from us. The other lived 3 miles from us. We had not mentioned a word that we were going to homeschool. Joe said, you know, you're going to have to tell them sometime. I said, yep. When they realize the kids aren't in school, they can ask me what's happening.
It's easier to get forgiveness than permission, right?
Yes, I thought, how am I going to defend something that I know nothing about?
That's right.
Really?
That's amazing.
So I called the superintendent, Dr. Williams, and I said, Dr. Williams, this is Zan Tyler, Sybil Peters' daughter. Can I come see you? I have a problem. He said, oh, I'll clear my calendar, honey. Come on up. So I went up right then and just explained that I loved my son. I wanted what was best for him. I knew he's very, very smart. He just wasn't ready for first grade this year. And told him the whole story. And he said, he looked at me, and I expected him to say, oh gosh, Zan, you've exhausted your administrative options. You've done a good job. And instead he looks at me and he said, well, you know, Zan, if you continue down this path of homeschooling, I can have you put in jail for truancy.
Wow.
And it just took my breath away. Took my breath away. And I heard, this was like one of these out-of-body experiences. I heard somebody in the room say, well, Dr. Williams, you'll just have to put me in jail then. It was me, but I didn't recognize it at the time. Where is that voice coming from? And so I got up and left. My hearing was the next week. I thought, I've got to go tell my parents, because if he's going to put me in jail, it's not going to say, Zan, peon, stay-at-home mom, Zan Tyler goes to jail. It's going to say John Peters' daughter goes to jail. And Dad was just really active in the community. He was chairman of the board of the Baptist Hospital System at the time. I mean, he was very involved. So I went and I told my parents. And by this time, I'm hysterical. I held it together until I got in their house. And my mother had been a public school teacher. I walk in, I say, Mom and Dad, I'm homeschooling Ty. Mom, here's the little bit of research I have, which is a pamphlet. Dad, who was an attorney by training, but not by practice anymore. And I said, Dad, here are all my legal briefs. And I've been threatened with jail on Wednesday or Tuesday. And I just wanted to let you know before they actually put the handcuffs on me and took me. And I'll leave. My poor parents, can you imagine how they felt? I mean, there's no research to give them. You couldn't say, look at the 5,000 kids that,
Yeah.
I mean, there's just nowhere to point them.
There's no Dr. Brian Ray with
yes, with all the statistics and
yeah.
the college admissions counselors who are beating these kids' doors down.
Yeah.
And so I just went home and just fell to pieces, crying and praying and everything else. So my dad called me the day after. He didn't know anything about homeschooling, but he was furious that I had been treated that way in the first place. And then he also had spoken with Nancy Thurman, who was Senator Thurman's wife, at a hospital function. Well, I had worked for the senator when I was in high school. I'd been governor of Girl State, and I really loved politics and thought I would have a career in politics. And so when I let my dream of law school go, I also thought my dream of being politically involved was gone too. But so I had spoken and done commercials and all during the 1972 campaign, which was the first year of the 18-year-old vote, and I was 18. And so Senator Thurman's staff said, I've looked at Zan's application. I've looked at the record. She's legal. I'm going to fax a letter to the state superintendent of education. Well, the next day, the senator's office called and said the senator's flying down to meet with the state superintendent on Zan's behalf. So he flew down, walked into Dr. Williams' office and said, Charlie, I've looked into her program. It's legal. You need to get off her back. So then my phone starts ringing, State Department of Education. Oh, Ms. Tyler, how are you today? Come on down. We're going to help you get ready for this hearing. And excuse me, there'll be no problems. We'd just like to meet you and your husband. Well, anyway, be that as it may, I was thrilled not to be facing jail. So that was the way we began homeschooling. The first year, I will tell you, all of the trappings of homeschooling were horrible. We had neighbors who would no longer speak to us or let their kids play with our kids. People at church wouldn't speak to us. It was just horrible. And I'm this extrovert, this extreme extrovert who loves people and, really wanted to please people. And I felt like I was in exile in my own home, not to be overly melodramatic, but that's just how it felt to me. And so but what was happening in our home was amazing. It was so interesting because I'd been a stay-at-home mother. The kids had been in preschool and kindergarten, both half days. And something, it's just magical what happened in our home during that first year of homeschooling. Ty's confidence came back. His gregarious nature came back. He had started with psychosomatic headaches and all kinds of stomach aches in kindergarten with all that stress going on about reading. And I began to understand their spiritual giftings. I mean, it was just, I was just blown away. I was totally blown away. And so the second year, we had to decide where to put the kids in school because we had said we were just getting Ty ready for first grade. And I looked at Joe and I said, honey, I think the Lord is calling us to homeschool another year. And he said, I was afraid of that.
Right.
You can see Joe.
Yes.
So now, of course, he's the most avid supporter of homeschooling there is. But then he told me the first year, he said, well, Zan, I know how much you love the Lord and I know how much you love the kids. And besides, how much can you mess up a kid in 5-year-old kindergarten? So thanks for that, Joe. But
not the greatest vote of confidence, but it is true. But first grade, right?
Yeah. That's right. So we homeschooled that year, and that was when all the political and the legal stuff really started. Was in 1985. I had a knock at my door around 11 o'clock. It was kind of like that midnight knock that missionaries get, and I thought, oh Lord, who is at my door? I almost didn't want to answer it. Had been waiting for the other shoe to drop anyway because we were approved fairly easily that year, and it was a neighbor of mine who ran a state agency. And he said, Zan, we hate your homeschooling, but we love you and your family. And do you know what the state register is? And I said, nope. And he said, well, this is a book where that representatives for agencies and legislators and interested parties can write out regulations for state agencies. And if they just sit there for 90 days, these promulgated regulations just become law. The legislature doesn't even have to act on them.
That's amazing.
And he said, there's one here for homeschooling that would require homeschooling parents to have a 4-year degree from a college, from college, accredited, which would let out Harvard and Bob Jones. And then you had to use only state approved text.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that was when I got involved with lobbying and trying to begin to connect. We didn't know we were developing a grassroots movement or just a part of that, not like we developed this movement, but that was when all of that started. And so for 8 years we were either in court or the legislature as a family trying to solve, as they called it, the homeschool problem. So
well, your name came up in conversation this very morning. I was talking earlier today in an interview with Michael Ferris, and he told me, and you've heard him say this before, but he told me about how he was working with the legislature in South Carolina, and he mentioned homeschooling, and the legislator said something about, I don't think about homeschooling, but when I hear the word, he said, I think of Joe and Zan Tyler. And Mike was saying to me that, times have changed since those early days in 1984 and 85 when homeschooling was illegal in some states and people were being threatened with jail and all that. He said he feels like one of the main ways that people can protect their home freedoms today is by being good neighbors, raising their children well, and being vocal about the fact that they homeschool. So unlike when I was being homeschooled or when your family was starting to homeschool, when we would, keep the curtains closed in the daytime and don't go outside during school hours. And when we would see a school bus, we would duck, that kind of thing. Really what we need to do now is not to be careless, but to let people know that we are a family that homeschools and to love and serve. And he was just using you as an example of someone who had modeled that even back in the day. And the legislature was impacted by the fact that they knew you and that you represented homeschooling well. And so there's a great charge, I think, to all of us. And one thing that I would like to encourage some of the younger parents, and particularly the homeschooling moms who are the podcast today, to consider is, I often find that homeschooling moms tell me that they wish they had a mentor. They wish they had someone who has been down the trail, who's been down the path, who has the life experience that they could go to and that they could draw from that person's wisdom. But they feel like so many times people are busy, they don't have time and so forth. And what I'd like to throw out there as a suggestion to the listeners is that Zan has really been able to put a lot of her wisdom into the workshops that she gives at conferences, into the book that she's written, and the resources that she's made available. And there really is a tremendous amount of mentoring that you can receive by simply finding her audio downloads and listening to them, by reading her book. You will be getting an invaluable type of education yourself on just the template of how to think about your child and how to believe in your child and how to unlock their potential and how to be able to endure in the midst of the hard times. I don't know of hardly anyone in the homeschooling movement that is a bigger encourager and a better mentor for homeschooling moms than Zan, which is part of why I wanted to have her on the show. And if you're not familiar with her, to introduce her to you. And one great place to start with that is if you go to her website, which is zantyler.com, you can download a few sample chapters of her book. It'll give you a bit of a flavor of her teaching. And she then will be able to send you her emails, her newsletter, and so forth, and be able to keep in touch with you. But Zan, what are some other ways that people can get in touch with you as an author? And again, we want to come back and talk about BJU in a minute, but as an author, as a conference speaker, obviously the website, but you use social media as well, right?
Well, I do some Facebook. So this is like true confessions. I have been terrible with social media. I've just been so busy. And then the last 7 years of my life, while I was working for a Christian publisher, I was also caring for my dad. And so it just, So I've really done a crummy job is what I'm saying. But I'm trying to do
podcasting, right? I'm trying to remedy my ways here.
Yes, so I'm trying to do better. So we have the website. I'm doing some Facebook on my speaker author page, and I am doing a lot of speaking. So I'm trying to make my website a repository. There's my podcast there with Heidi St. John, where we talk about some legal issues and some other videos. So, excellent. But this is really a reminder to me that I need to do better. And thank you so much for those very kind, gracious words.
Well, I think people will find that you have a tremendous amount to offer to the homeschooling community, and not just homeschooling, Christian schools, women's groups. You and Joe, I know, have even talked on marriage. Joe has some great messages for dads. He's a great speaker for dads. So if there's a homeschool group, a conference in particular, a church that wants to have you come and speak, I know they can get in touch with you through your website, Zan Tyler. That's ZAN, Tyler.com. And then let's talk about what you're doing now. We had a chance to, myself and some other homeschool leaders earlier this year before the COVID lockdown, had a chance to go down to Greenville, South Carolina, and see some of the work that you are doing with Homeworks by Precept and BJU Press. Tell us a little bit about your involvement there and what's happening there.
Well, I was so excited after I left Apologia. It was the week before the National Homeschool Leadership Conference that we all go to, that HSLDA sponsors. And I ran into Sharon Fisher, who has been with Homeworks by Precept and BJU Press for many years. And I told her that I was out of work and wasn't ready to leave the homeschooling community yet. I mean, it's really my heart and my passion.
Right.
And so it just worked out that week. I met Mike Knott, who is the director of Homeworks by Precept for the homeschool division. And they needed someone to help them connect more with the homeschooling community, heart to heart. They wanted to really start a new age of investing in the homeschooling community, not just selling to. And I had used BJU Press as a young homeschool mom, and I had also been on our church Christian school board, and we had made the switch from one curriculum to BJU Press after I'd had a chance to study the curriculum and its worldview. And so I had been a longtime user of BJU Press, and I had been to the help conferences that they did in the 90s. A lot of your listeners or viewers won't be familiar with that, but they did some of the early conferences, and the whole conference, they might have 3,000 or 4,000 people there if you count kids, and they pulled in all their professors to do children's programs, and then had keynote speakers and workshops during the daytime and at evening. So I've got a long history of having worked with them. And so I just, it's interesting, Israel, but it was like the first half of my homeschool career was freedom fighting. It was being involved in the legislature, starting a homeschooling organization, which, by the way, I'll just mention this about SCAES. It was the first time in the country that a state general assembly had given a private sector organization the same power as local school boards in monitoring and approving homeschool programs. So Mike and I had worked a lot together on that. And, he just, I remember him saying, this is the advancement of the important legal principle of self-government. So, so I felt like I had poured myself into that and my family had, for the first 17 years we homeschooled. And the last half of my homeschool career has really been in Christian publishing, because I know the need for infrastructure. We've got support groups and state organizations, but I've always felt like I wanted there to be plenty of resources for Christian parents to use that had a biblical worldview that were sustainable to use. And so that's been my heart and my passion the last half of my homeschooling career. And so when I teamed up with BJU Press, it was sort of historical for me because they had been there for me in my early years as a homeschooling mom. But they've also, I mean, over the years, they've even gotten a stronger biblical worldview message as they consider the biblical worldview shaping in math, and how math, I mean, it's important how we teach math and how math can have a biblical worldview, and science and all these other things. So for me, it's just been a real natural blend. And so I've been able, we've Homeworks by Precept, along with BJU Press, we've sponsored many state leadership conferences, wanting to invest in state leaders and in state organizations. BJU Press, I think, is probably one of the most, they are at all the conferences, did over 100 conferences last year. And many times they've got 8 to 10 booths. So they've really supported conferences. And so it's where my heart is. And to be able to join with the company and that be their heart, it's just been fabulous.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know how long you and I have known each other, if it's 15 years or 20, I don't know for sure. It goes back a while. But I know that you've had a long-term commitment to promoting a biblical worldview, and BJU Press has made a relatively new commitment to revise their curriculum and update it every 5 years. Mm-hmm. And they've made massive revisions to the curriculum to make sure that it's not merely Christian, but that it really actively applies a biblical philosophy of education in every subject at every grade level. And so I've been really impressed with what I've seen with the new revisions of their curriculum, and the mentoring that they offer with their curriculum, I think, is a great addition as well. There's just a lot more hand-holding that they provide for families who want to use their curriculum. And I think bringing you on as part of their team to be able to provide the homeschool perspective is really vital, because obviously they sell to a lot of Christian schools and there's a classroom dynamic, but the homeschool dynamic is different than the classroom dynamic, and no one understands that better than you. So having you as part of their team, I think, helps to be able to ensure that they can integrate as effectively as possible with the homeschooling community. And
not to interrupt you, but I don't want to lose this thought, because this was, it's not like I pride myself on knowing what's going on in the homeschooling community, but I just know what's going on in the homeschooling community, because this is this is where I've lived my adult life.
Right.
But the one thing that shocked me was I had no idea that there were over 200 local consultants that work for Homeworks by Precept. And these moms are like support group leaders. I mean, they pray with the people, they pray with the parents who are interested in the curriculum, but they're praying over, can my kid get into college? What about sports? What about music? I've got a child with a bad attitude. These consultants are really acting like support group leaders in that regard, and really shepherding and mentoring the women that they're working with. They can always give them the best price on the curriculum, which is important, because you know how it's homeschooling families. We pinch pennies and corners and all of that. And so that has, to me, that's been the greatest, the most wonderful surprise. And I keep telling Mike, this is the best kept secret in the homeschool world. And but it is that whole new level with the curriculum of providing the mentoring for moms.
Well, I'm excited that you're still involved in homeschooling leadership. We all in the homeschool community, in the leadership side of it, benefit greatly from your continued participation. You and Joe are bright spots in the homeschooling world. And I think a lot of the homeschooling parents have probably benefited from your work far more than what they realize, just through the resources that they've been able to access that have helped them, that maybe they didn't even know that you were involved in. So in the future, I would like to have you back on the podcast, and maybe we can discuss some issues, answer some questions. And I think you'd be a great resource for providing some mommy help, if you will, in particular for the discouraged mom. I know, again, a lot of your workshops deal with that, dealing with burnout and some of that. So maybe we can come back and do a more topically oriented message in the future. But for now, I just wanted to give people the opportunity to get to know you a little bit, to check out your website, to plug into your resources. And I know and am confident that they will be encouraged and will be equipped for the task by doing so. So thank you, Zan, for making time out of your day to be on the show. And I look forward to when we can get to talk again. And also when we all get out of this lockdown somewhere in the future and can
The truth.
meet with our friends and the families that we love seeing out at the actual physical events. So,
Yes. Boy, haven't you missed that? Oh, gosh.
yeah, and maybe by the time this airs, because this, these are pre-recorded, maybe by the time it airs, we'll even be out of it. I don't know, but we deeply appreciate you. So thank you again, Zan.
Well, thank you, Israel. And thank you for the ministry you not only had with so many moms, but with me. There are just many times I can think of twice, I was just really discouraged. And your message and just your kindness, the way you're just so kind, really gave grace to my soul. I just want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Give our love to Joe and to tell him we look forward to seeing him again. And like I said, we'll look forward to having you on again in the future.
Okay. Thank you so much, Israel.
All right. God bless.
Bye-bye.